Okay, today I'm going to be making a laser beam similar to like Man of Steel, where like laser eyes or something like that. Just kind of a rippling laser beam sort of thing. So I'm just gonna delete the default cube, of course, and then I'm going to create a cylinder. And I thought that maybe 12 is a good number. Um, I'm just gonna go to edit mode here and move it up by 1 so that the pivot point is anchored on the bottom. I'm gonna switch to the pivot point and then rotate it on the x-axis by -90, I think. Yes, so that the y-axis is going straight up the middle. And then I'll just grab the end cap here and move it maybe 15. That might be too much. I don't know. It doesn't really matter, just somewhere out here, so maybe 8. And then I'm just going to select everything and scale it, but I'm going to limit the y-axis with Shift Y. And then I'm just going to scale the whole thing down to pretty small, actually, because, laser beam. Okay, that's pretty much it for the mesh. Actually, no, there's one more thing. After you've determined what length you want it, and cut the, let me actually deselect everything so you can see better what I'm doing. I'm going to cut everything up into more square-like segments, so something maybe like that. It doesn't really matter how many you do, just do quite a few. And that should be it for the modeling of the object. I'm going to actually place my camera next. So I have lock to camera view on, so I'm just going to rotate around and orbit around until I find something I like. Maybe something like this, where I'm like looking down the tube. Something like that. I'm just going to turn lock to camera view off because our camera is locked now. Oh, and there is one more thing we need to do with the mesh. We need to delete these end caps. So I'm just going to delete the faces on the ends here, just because we're going to be adding a subdivision surfaces and a where is it? Displace. There it is. Modifiers. So I'm just going to turn subsurface up to 2, and then I'm going to just use the default texture that's always there in Blender, at least in my Blender, and come over and switch it to clouds. And you'll get this really, really weird looking thing, but that's what we want, because we're trying to make kind of like a ripple along the entire length of the beam that's going to like travel to make it kind of warble, or whatever word you want to use for that. So I'm going to set this to 0.2 in the size. That's just what I found for this length of beam. But go ahead and play around with this value, because it really kind of subtly changes how your beam will look. Then I'm going to go back to the modifier tab and change the strength, a lot down. I think I want like 0.1 or something. That might even be too much. You kind of really want it to be subtle, so I'm going to do 0.02. Yeah, like really subtle. But you can always change all of these values later and tweak how it looks. I might even change the mid-level to be just a little bit smaller so that it's skinnier. I don't know, something. Okay, so now we have this like rippling beam sort of thing coming straight for our camera. Okay, to make it kind of ripple, the best way I've found is to make an empty. So I'm just going to create an empty here, and actually let's start naming things. Beam, and this one will be ripple. Okay, so on our beam object, if we come down to our displacement, we can change this texture coordinates from local to object, and then we can add our ripple object to this. So that means that wherever we move this, it moves the where the displacement is. So we're going to be animating this object in an infinite y dimension. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to add a keyframe, just a single keyframe, to the y value, because we're going to be traveling in the y axis. And then I'm going to go to like frame 5 and move it maybe like to here, like 2 units or something, and hit I again. And then to make it kind of just like travel infinitely, I'm just going to switch this to the graph editor, and there we can see our graph. we need to hit T and change this to linear with all of our points selected, and that will make it not smooth. And then we need to open up the tab over here and go to the modifiers and hit cycles, not like the renderer, but it will just repeat. So we need to change both of these to repeat with offset, and that way this will just go off into infinity in the line that we've made. If I play our animation now, we should see, let me get a better camera angle for that. We should see our object just fly away into the distance forever. Bye bye. And it also brings the texture with it. We should see our object rippling. So that's pretty good. If we select our ripple object, the speed of the rippling is determined by where these keyframes are. So if I hit G, and then I'm just going to lock it to the y-axis, and then move this up, our rippling actually gets faster. You can't tell a little bit because the frame rate kind of determines that, but they're slower and faster. So we want to get a nice speed where you can't really tell one frame from the next. It's a little bit more random. Now this is kind of a place where you should kind of play around with your displacement settings, like turn the strength up, or that's way too much, like that, where I think I liked what I had, which was 0.02, but you can play with the texture size to see if that changes anything. I kind of like this, a size of 0.4, so I think that's good, and I'm just going to stop our animation. So that should be it for the this beam here. We could add particles later, but I might want to do that after we play around with our material. So let's get on to the material. I'm just going to close my timeline window and open up another window over here and just change this to the node editor. We don't need that window. I'm just going to use the default material on this, even though it's my default material with my PBR shader, but I'm just going to delete that, so don't need to worry about any of that, and add a emission shader. I'm going to connect it to the surface. Now I'm just going to switch over to camera view here and pretty much leave it that way for a while, and we can focus on materials. So let's go to rendered mode, and you can see that what we have is just blackness and a little bit of white. So another thing I did is I made my world just completely black. I did that before I started recording, so just because default I think it's like this gray color, so we just want that to be completely black. Ta-da! Okay, now onto the material. So we want the material to have like some variation in it. So the best way I've found to do that is to add a noise texture. So I'm just gonna input the factor into the strength here, and that did some interesting stuff. Turn this value up to maybe like 30 something in the scale, and we don't really need to worry about detail or distortion. I mean, maybe a little bit of distortion, that could be cool, but I didn't really play with that. So to get this to look alright, we should probably add a converter math node to right in between those two to multiply the glow by 5 so that it's still really bright. It just has like a little tiny bit of variation that we can't really see, but the compositor can see when it's adding the glow. I'm just going to actually mute this node for now so we can see what we're doing, and add a vector mapping node. There it is. Plug that in there, and then go to input and add a texture coordinate node. Now in here, this object field is the same object field that is in this displace modifier. So if we connect this object output here into the vector, we should be able to connect our ripple object and have the texture going along with the placement. So you can sort of see it there. It's sort of hard to tell with all the refreshing and rendering going on. So let's make the Y value here like 0.1 or something to kind of stretch it out, because I think the stretched look in the Y dimension, it looks better and kind of implies the motion of it going either forwards or backwards, but we should have it going forwards. Hopefully it implies it goes forwards. So something that's kind of missing is it's all just kind of this like soft in and out of the variation here, and we really want it to be a little bit more harsh. So I'm actually going to add a converter color ramp node right in between these two nodes, the math node and the noise texture node, and I'm just going to bring the white value up and the black value, or the white value closer and the black value closer to that, just to get a little bit more contrast on that. And you can play around with this however you want, maybe something like that. And then if we turn on our multiply by hitting M to unmute it, we can see what that's actually going to do, and that might be too much contrast. Maybe something more like that. I don't know, we could bring our black value up to try and get more variation, but we don't want too much, because too much will break up the glow of it. Okay, so that's our whole material so far. What I do really want to do though is add a shader transparent right here. I'm going to put that above the emission shader, and I'm using an add-on called Node Wrangler so that I can just hold down Option and right click and drag between these two, and it'll create a mix shader for those. But so you might see me using that shortcut quite a bit to connect nodes and stuff, but you can just get to that using the user preferences and type in Node Wrangler and hitting the checkbox there. I want this transparent shader to be controlled by the color of this color ramp, so that the black areas are actually transparent. And we can kind of demonstrate this by changing the color of the background. If we bring this up, you should see that those areas aren't black. Here, if I just do the emission shader, you can see that these are black, but with the transparent, they're actually the color of the background. So they'll let the background through a little bit, and I think that's quite important. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Oh, except for the color. So on our emission shader, we want to change our color to whatever color laser beam. You could go blue laser beam, but I'm gonna go kind of an orangey red, because as I mentioned, this is kind of based on like Superman laser eyes or something like that. So I think we're ready to do our first render and work on the compositing nodes. So I'm actually going to switch over to compositing right now, and you want to make sure you have use nodes and backdrop on for this part. So now we can hit render, which is just F12, and voila, there you go. That looks so beautiful. Not really. And we can get started compositing. I'm actually going to zoom the background out a little bit by hitting V a few times, just because that's a little bit annoying and you can't see the nodes very well. And then hold down Option and middle click to just kind of drag it off to the side so we can look at it. So I'm going to add a filter glare node. I'm just going to add that in there and connect it up to the compositing node. Now that's looking a little bit better, but I'm actually going to change it to make it a little bit worse, or maybe not worse, just different. And I'm going to turn my size up to really high and turn the threshold down to maybe like 0.4 or something like that, just so that we have a lot of glow there with the fog glow instead of the streaks. Okay, and then I'm going to add like a glow that's bigger than the glow, kind of glow. But before I do that, I'm going to save, because I already did this once before and I didn't save and I lost it all because I hit a random hotkey that closed down my whole thing. So now we can continue with compositing. I should have saved earlier, but I didn't. Let's add a blur node and make it fast Gaussian, and I'm just going to set this to 1 in the blur, and I'm going to connect the image, and I'm going to hold down Shift and Control and click on the node to preview it with the viewer. So now we should be able to adjust the blur size with this size value. So let's make this like 25. I think that's good for this first one. So now I'm going to hit Shift D and duplicate this blur node, pull it down here and make this value like something like, let's try 16 actually. Now this one will be 32, and let's connect the image to that, and then I'm going to do my same trick, Option, right click and drag to create a mix node, and I'm just going to set this to add and maybe like 0.5 mix on that. So now those should be adding together. I wonder if this first one should be 32 and this one should be 64. Something like that will do. And then I'm going to duplicate my blur node again and input the image into it and change this to 128. Now I'm going to use my trick again, Option, right click and drag to make a mix node. Then I'm going to mix that to add and maybe like 0.4 or something like that. And then I think I'm going to do this one more time. So I'm going to maybe make this like 256, add these two with maybe like 0.3. Just so it kind of like, it adds this like giant glow that fades off into the distance. Could be a little bit bigger. I wonder if I should start with the bigger size. So let's do this one's 64, This one's 128, this one's 256, and this one is 512. Just so we have a giant, massive glow. And then I'm going to duplicate my mix node, and I'm going to put it right there, my add node here. And then I'm going to drag what we already did with the glow into that. And now we can control this entire glow noodle thing to, like, you know, really low. So it's really subtle, but it is there. Yeah, something like that. And I'm going to save. So now let's add a little bit more detail to this glow, which we could solo out using Control and Shift and clicking on the node. It's a pretty good glow, but it's not like really big or anything. So let's add a filter glare node again to that one, and I'm just going to Shift Control click on that, and that will add those streaks back in, which they're kind of cool, but they're a little bit brilliant. So I'm actually going to turn my streak value up all the way up to 16. I'm going to increase my fade distance to like almost the max, and I'm going to increase color modulation just to get a cool like rainbow glow like that. Oh yeah, that's cool. And I'm going to change the threshold to something like 0.5. I don't know, maybe not. That might be too bright. Let's go back to 1. And then let's change mix to something like -0.8 so that it adds a really subtle effect. Yeah, like that. That might even be too much. I don't know. Maybe turn our threshold up to 1.1. That might remove it completely. I don't know. I really want this effect to be really subtle because hopefully it's going to be like flashing around. Like it won't just stay in these areas. It'll be moving all over the place. Maybe even minus our mix some more, like -0.9, something like that. I don't know. It's really subtle now. Maybe just do 1.5 on the threshold, but I think that'll be good. Now we can add our other glow back on and see what that looks like. There we go. So it's a little bland right now. I mean, it's just a laser beam sort of thing, and we haven't really seen it moving all glowing like that, but you never really do until the end. So I'm going to save here and then go back to my default window. So the next thing we could do to kind of spice it up a little bit is add particles. Let's move to a different layer. So I'm just going to go to layer 3, and I'm going to make a icosphere, and I'm going to change the subdivisions down to 1 and the size down to like 0.1. So it's just a really tiny low poly sphere. We're almost done with that. We just need to add our same material to it. Now we can go back to layer 1 and 2, and we can select our beam object and go to particles and add a new particle system. And the first thing I want to do is go down to field weights and just turn off gravity. Okay, and the very next thing I want to do is turn up the Brownian quite a bit, and a little bit of drag and a little bit of damping, maybe a lot of drag, a little bit of damping. And I'm going to change my particle emission to 2000, my start to -5 or so, and my end to 120, because that's just where my timeline is. Actually, speaking of that, we should probably get a timeline back. I don't want to do this. Yeah, here we go. I want my timeline. Okay, so now we can hit Shift A and see what this does. We can't see anything. Why not? Okay, let's change our render tab to object, and oh, there's some stuff. Icosphere. So it's duplicating all those spheres. Let's see what that does. Well, that looks kind of weird. Let's change our random size up quite a bit on the sphere. And our overall size 0.4 maybe, but this size we should play with it a little bit later when we get to the rendering of it, because that's where it really matters. And let's see, lifetime. Let's make this something like 20, and then turn up the random a lot on the lifetime. So let's preview that again. That's looking a little bit better. They look kind of like a little bit like sparks. The drag and the damping are what makes them like slow down and kind of like have that ramp feeling to them. So playing with these values, I don't know what drag really does, if it does anything. But yeah, and then the Brownian makes them like kind of like search around. It makes that like wiggly pattern. So we don't want that too high, but we want it up there a little bit. Okay, and now let's go to our velocity tab here and turn our normal up to 2 so that they're flying out a little bit faster, and turn our Y up to something like 5 so they're flying forwards. Now we might have our Brownian up too much. Oops, that was more. Or maybe our dampening not up enough? No. I don't know, these are like flying away a little bit faster than I want. So let's just make our normal 1. But we want them all flying kind of forward. So maybe even 10 on this forwards motion so that they're kind of flying towards the camera a little bit more. And that should be it for the particles, except for, you know, adjusting the size and kind of looking what they look like in the render. So let's get to rendering them. And I'm going to switch to rendered view. What I really want is for them to kind of like fade away the closer to the end of their life we get. So to do that, we need to go into our material here and add a couple of properties. So we need to add a input particle info node, which will get these age and lifetime inputs that will tell us how old the particles are. And then we can use a converter math divide node to divide the age by the lifetime, or something like that. We might have to switch around with those. Then we can use our handy dandy hotkey option, right click and drag to the color ramp. Actually no, we don't have to have that separate. Okay, and then use a mix node to plug the math into the factor of what is determining how old the particles are. So basically what we're saying here is, as it gets older, which is what these two nodes do, make it more black. So we're feeding this into the factor for the mix shader, so they will become more transparent because we already have this transparent shader. Hopefully. I think that's what this does. That as they fly out, they just kind of like fade away. Yeah, if you watch some particles down here, like this one, it's way more transparent like in its life cycle than it was. So hopefully that'll do what we want. Maybe 2000 is too many. Maybe just do the default 1000. It's kind of up to you, and play around with all of these settings, because that's kind of what I did to find them in the first place. Okay, I think that's almost it. We need to do one more thing, which is go to the rendering tab and turn on motion blur. Now we won't see anything here, but when we render it, we definitely will. And just, you know, take a look at our sampling and see if that's all good. If you wanted to do an animation, of course, you know, save it somewhere with that. I'm gonna do a render and just see how my glow works and looks on our particles. And the glow, that looks pretty awesome. I think our color ramp might be a little too contrasty here, because this is way too black, I think. So I'm actually going to turn that down and maybe turn the white up a little bit more even. Maybe something like that. And let's render that again. Yeah, just to make those a little bit softer, because they were a little too bright. And there we go. So that's a laser beam in Blender. The next thing to do is, you know, render out the animation, and I'll just play the finished render for you guys after it's done. Okay, so here it is, all finished. It looks pretty good, but I would change a few things about it, like just the speed in general. I think it's going too slow, and maybe add a little bit of gravity to the sparks. But other than that, I think it looks pretty good. So I hope you liked this tutorial, and thank you for watching. See you next time.